So let me get this straight, Edward said, looking over my very detailed sketch of the proposed middle finger hedge. You want me to trim your hedges into this? Exactly, I said, nodding enthusiastically. A giant middle finger, as big as possible, as detailed as possible. And most importantly, directed right at that house. I pointed across the street, towards Hortense Hightower's perfectly manicured and hedge-free residence. Edward stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. You're serious? Dead serious, I said. I have a situation with my HOA, and this is my response. Edward grinned. Mr. Miller, I love it. This is going to be the most epic hedge sculpture I've ever created, but are you sure about this? It's a bit direct. Direct is exactly what I'm going for, I said. I want it to be unmistakable. I want it to be unforgettable. I want it to be the most glorious, defiant, middle-finger hedge the world has ever seen. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and I, Sam Miller, was reclining in my hammock, sipping lemonade and admiring my hedges. Yes, hedges. I know, it doesn't sound like the most exciting pastime, but I found a certain zen-like satisfaction in the slightly overgrown, slightly unruly state of my privet hedges. They weren't neglected, mind you, just relaxed, like me. They provided a nice privacy screen, a bit of shade, and a haven for the local bird population. In short, they were perfect. Of course, perfect is a subjective term, especially in Greenhaven Glades. Greenhaven Glades. The name conjured up images of rolling hills, lush meadows, and a general sense of natural beauty. The reality was a bit more controlled. Manicured lawns, identical houses, and an HOA with a rule book thicker than a Tolstoy novel. I'd always managed to stay mostly under the radar, content to enjoy my little slice of suburban un-paradise. Until he showed up. He approached with the grim determination of a process server, clipboard clutched to his chest like a shield. He was a small, wiry man with a perpetually pinched expression and a name tag that read, Mr. Prickly, HOA Compliance Officer. Prickly by name, prickly by nature, it seemed. Mr. Miller? He asked, his voice as sharp and pointed as his neatly trimmed mustache. That's me, I said, slowly extracting myself from the hammock, a sense of impending doom settling over me. Something I can help you with? I'm here about your hedges, Mr. Prickly said, his eyes scanning my slightly overgrown privet with unconcealed disdain. They're in violation of community guidelines. Violation? I repeated, feigning innocence. How so? They're too tall, Mr. Miller, Mr. Prickly said, his voice tight with disapproval. They're unruly. They detract from the uniform aesthetic of Greenhaven Glades. He made it sound like my hedges were committing a crime against humanity, not just, growing. He also claims my hedges are blocking sunlight from reaching Miss Hightower's home. Uniform aesthetic? I countered, gesturing towards the rows of identical houses lining the street. You mean beige? Mr. Prickly ignored my comment. Section 4, Paragraph C, Subclause 7 of the Greenhaven Glades HOA Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, he recited, as if quoting scripture. Hedges must be maintained at a height not exceeding 4 feet and must be kept neatly trimmed at all times. They provide privacy, Mr. Prickly, I explained, trying to reason with him. And the birds like them. I've seen several nests in there. Birds, Mr. Prickly repeated, his nose wrinkling in disgust. Nesting in unruly hedges. Precisely the problem, Mr. Miller. I pointed out that there weren't actually any rules broken yet, but he gave me a warning anyways. It was clear that this wasn't going to be a rational conversation. Mr. Prickly was a drone, a rule enforcer, a man who probably measured his own grass with a micrometer. He handed me a warning notice, informed me that I had 2 weeks to remedy the situation, and marched off, his clipboard held high like a banner of bureaucratic triumph. I, Sam Miller, was officially at war with the HOA, over Hedges. The HOA meeting was, as expected, a masterclass in pettiness and power tripping. It was held in the Greenhaven Glades community room, a space that seemed to have been deliberately designed to be as sterile and unwelcoming as possible. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige everything. The board members sat at a long table, looking like a collection of disapproving garden gnomes. And presiding over them all was Hortense Hightower, the president of the Greenhaven Glades HOA, and the undisputed queen of all things orderly and under control. She was an older woman, always impeccably dressed in a severe, businesslike suit, usually in some shade of gray or navy, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression a permanent mask of disapproval. She radiated an air of control and a deep-seated hatred of anything that deviated even slightly from her meticulously defined vision of suburban perfection. She was, in short, my nemesis. "Mr. Miller," Hortense began, her voice sharp and accusatory, "your hedges have been brought to our attention." She said hedges as if they were a particularly offensive species of venomous snake. "My hedges, Miss Hightower," I corrected, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, "are perfectly healthy. They provide privacy, shelter for wildlife, and, I believe, a touch of natural beauty to the neighborhood." "They're eyesores, Mr. Miller," Hortense declared, her voice rising in pitch. "They're unneighborly. They're a blatant disregard for community standards." "They're hedges, Hortense," I repeated, my patience wearing thin. "Plants, green, leafy things, they grow. That's what they do." "They're attracting pests," she continued, ignoring my comment. "Squirrels, birds, and who knows what else might be lurking in those unruly bushes." "They're providing habitat, Hortense," I countered. "They're part of the ecosystem, and frankly, I enjoy watching the birds and squirrels." "They're lowering property values," she insisted. "They make the neighborhood look unkempt, uncivilized." She went on to announce her proposition. "A new rule will be voted on at the next meeting. It would place further restrictions on the height of hedges." I pointed out, yet again, that there weren't currently any rules being broken. The other board members, a collection of mostly middle-aged men and women who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few of them, I noticed, had slightly overgrown hedges visible from their own windows. Perhaps they were secret hedge rebels, yearning to break free from the tyranny of Hortense Hightower. But Hortense? She was unmoved. She was a woman on a mission to eradicate all traces of untamed nature from Greenhaven Glades. "The hedges, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dangerously low, "must be trimmed to a reasonable height. You have been warned." She slammed her gavel down, signaling the end of the discussion, and seemingly the end of my peaceful existence in Greenhaven Glades. I walked out of that meeting, my blood simmering, my sense of injustice reaching a boiling point. Hortense Hightower had declared war on my hedges, and I, Sam Miller, was not about to surrender. The official notice arrived a few days later, delivered with the solemnity of a death warrant. It was printed on thick, cream-colored paper, embossed with the Greenhaven Glades HOA logo. A perfectly manicured lawn, naturally, and filled with legalese that basically boiled down to one thing: trim your hedges or else. Hedges, the notice stated, must be maintained at a height not exceeding 3 feet. All hedges must be neatly trimmed and shaped, with no protrusions or irregularities. The deadline: 2 weeks. The penalty for non-compliance: a hefty fine, followed by further action up to and including forced landscaping services, which I imagined involved a team of HOA-approved landscapers descending upon my yard with chainsaws and a complete disregard for my personal preferences. 3 feet! My hedges were at least 6 feet tall, a glorious wall of green that provided privacy, shade, and a haven for birds. Trimming them to 3 feet would be butchery. It would be hedgicide. It would be unacceptable. My internal monologue was a colorful mix of outrage, disbelief, and a growing amusement at the sheer pettiness of it all. 3 feet? I muttered to myself. Seriously? They're measuring hedges now? What's next? A mandatory leaf count? I wasn't going to give in. Not to Hortense Hightower. Not to the HOA. Not to the tyranny of the perfectly trimmed hedge. I was going to fight back. But how? I needed a plan, a strategy, a way to comply with the letter of the law while utterly, completely, and hilariously violating its spirit. I paced my living room, my mind racing. I considered various options. Trimming the hedges into the shape of animals? Too cliché. Painting them bright pink? Too obvious. Spelling out HOA sucks in giant letters? Tempting, but probably illegal. Then I reread the notice again. The wording specified that the hedges had to be a certain height. It didn't say how I had to accomplish that. It did say it had to be neatly trimmed. A slow smile spread across my face. Neatly trimmed, I muttered. Oh, I'll give them neatly trimmed. They want them cut, I'll cut them. The plan, when it fully formed in my mind, was so audacious, so juvenile, so utterly perfect, that I burst out laughing. I wouldn't just trim my hedges, I'd sculpt them into something memorable, something unforgettable, something that would send a clear, unmistakable message to Hortense Hightower and the entire Greenhaven Glades HOA. I would trim my hedges into the shape of a giant middle finger. It was perfect, it was absurd, it was exactly the kind of ridiculous, over-the-top response that this situation demanded. It would be a massive, meticulously crafted, and utterly unsubtle act of topiary defiance. A green, leafy middle finger directed squarely at Hortense Hightower's house, which, conveniently, was located directly across the street from mine. I'd argue, of course, that I was technically complying with the HOA's order. I was trimming my hedges. I was reducing their overall height. Well, most of it anyway. And I was certainly creating a unique landscape feature. The overall height would be lower, even if certain protrusions were considerably taller. I could already picture Hortense's reaction. The sputtering outrage, the vein throbbing in her forehead, the inevitable screaming fit. It was a beautiful image. I knew it was childish. I knew it was probably going to escalate the conflict. But I didn't care. This wasn't just about hedges anymore. It was about principle. It was about freedom. It was about the right to, well, to express myself through strategically shaped shrubbery. Operation Flipping the Hedge was a go, and Greenhaven Glades was about to get a whole lot more interesting. My first challenge was finding someone to help me execute my vision. I needed a landscaper, yes, but not just any landscaper. I needed a topiary artist, a master of the hedge clippers, a Michelangelo of the privet. I found him online. His name was Edward, of course, and his website showcased an impressive portfolio of topiary creations. Giant animals, intricate geometric shapes, even a life-sized replica of the Eiffel Tower made entirely out of boxwood. He was clearly the man for the job. So, let me get this straight. Edward said, looking over my very detailed sketch of the proposed middle finger hedge. You want me to trim your hedges into this? Exactly, I said, nodding enthusiastically. A giant middle finger, as big as possible, as detailed as possible, and most importantly, directed right at that house. I pointed across the street towards Hortense Hightower's perfectly manicured and hedge-free residence. Edward stared at me for a moment, then burst out laughing. You're serious? Dead serious, I said. I have a situation with my HOA, and this is my response. Edward grinned. Mr. Miller, I love it. This is going to be the most epic hedge sculpture I've ever created, but are you sure about this? It's a bit direct. Direct is exactly what I'm going for, I said. I want it to be unmistakable. I want it to be unforgettable. I want it to be the most glorious, defiant, middle finger hedge the world has ever seen. And so construction, or rather deconstruction, began. Edward, a true artist with a pair of hedge clippers, arrived with an arsenal of tools: electric shears, hand clippers, scaffolding, measuring tapes, and even a level. Apparently, even rebellious topiary requires precision. He surveyed my overgrown privet hedges with a critical eye, then nodded, a mischievous glint in his eyes. This is going to be fun, he said. The trimming process was a slow, meticulous, and utterly fascinating spectacle. Edward worked with the skill of a surgeon, carefully shaping and sculpting the hedges, gradually transforming them from a shapeless green mass into a giant, unmistakable symbol of defiance. He started with the base of the finger, trimming the surrounding hedges down to the HOA-mandated 3-foot height. Then, he began to work on the finger itself, carefully shaping and pruning, stepping back frequently to assess his progress. It was like watching Michelangelo carve David, except instead of marble, he was working with privet, and instead of a Renaissance masterpiece, he was creating a giant, leafy middle finger. The neighbors, as expected, were captivated. They gathered on their lawns, watching the transformation with a mixture of shock, amusement, laughter, and a growing sense of, he did not just do that. I even saw a few of them taking pictures. I suspected my middle finger hedge was about to become a local legend. My internal monologue was a constant stream of giddy anticipation and triumphant pronouncements. Take that, Hortense Hightower, I muttered to myself as the finger began to take shape. Enjoy your uniform aesthetic now. I imagined her face, contorted with rage, her perfectly coiffed hair standing on end. It was a beautiful thought. There was, of course, a brief visit from Mr. Prickly, the HOA's ever-vigilant and increasingly stressed-out enforcer. Mr. Miller? He stammered, looking up at the partially sculpted hedge, his face a mask of horrified confusion. What exactly is this? It's topiary, Mr. Prickly, I said with a perfectly straight face. I'm trimming my hedges, as per the HOA's request. But it's... He sputtered, clearly struggling to find the words. It's a work in progress, I interrupted. A landscape enhancement. A tribute to modern art. Mr. Prickly stared at me, then at the hedge, then back at me. He clearly had no idea what to do. He mumbled something about consulting with the board and retreated, looking utterly defeated. I, Sam Miller, had once again outmaneuvered the HOA, and my middle finger hedge, my monument to suburban rebellion, was nearing completion. The anticipation was almost unbearable. The neighborhood was buzzing, and I, for one, couldn't wait to see the final result. The unveiling of the Greenhaven salute, as I'd christened my topiary masterpiece, was a moment I'll cherish forever. It stood there, in my front yard, in all its leafy, defiant glory. A giant, unmistakable middle finger, meticulously sculpted from my, formerly, overgrown privet hedges. It was beautiful. It was absurd. It was the perfect embodiment of my contempt for Hortense Hightower and her ridiculous rules. And, as expected, Hortense's reaction was spectacular. She arrived, predictably, in a state of apoplectic fury, her face a mask of outrage, her perfectly coiffed hair, or what was left of it after my previous HOA battles, practically vibrating with indignation. She didn't even bother with the pretense of knocking. She just stormed onto my property, her heels clicking on the pavement like the hooves of an approaching apocalypse. "What?" she bellowed, her voice echoing through the previously peaceful neighborhood. "Have you done?" I emerged from behind the Greenhaven salute, a picture of calm serenity, holding a pair of gardening shears and wearing a t-shirt that read, "I break for topiary." "Good morning, Hortense," I said, my voice smooth and even. "You're admiring my hedge trimming, I presume?" "Hedge trimming?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the massive green digit. This is obscene. It's a giant hand, giving everyone the finger." "I trimmed my hedges, Hortense," I corrected, with a perfectly straight face, "as per your request, or rather, your demand. And, as you can see, it's perfectly compliant with the height requirement. The overall height of the hedge has been significantly reduced. Although," I added with a mischievous grin, "certain parts may be a bit taller." You did this on purpose," she accused, her voice shaking with rage. You maniac." "I simply exercised my artistic license, Hortense," I said with a shrug. "And I must say I'm quite pleased with the result. It's bold, it's expressive, it's a statement." I paused for dramatic effect. "I call it the Greenhaven salute." "It's a disgrace," she sputtered, her face turning a shade of purple I'd previously only seen on overripe eggplants. It's offensive. It's going to traumatize the children." "I think the children find it quite amusing," I countered, gesturing towards a group of kids who were gathered on the sidewalk, giggling and pointing at the hedge. "And frankly, Hortense, I think it's a vast improvement over your aesthetic standards." Hortense opened her mouth to retort, but no words came out. She just stood there, sputtering and fuming, her eyes fixated on the giant green middle finger that now dominated my front yard, and quite possibly her nightmares. I'll have this thing removed," she finally managed to choke out, her voice hoarse. "I'll sue you. You'll do nothing, Hortense," I said, my voice firm. "Because as I've said before, I've followed the rules. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go. Admire my art." I turned and walked back towards the Greenhaven salute, leaving Hortense standing alone on my lawn, looking like a deflated and very angry balloon. The emergency HOA meeting, Part 2, the hedge hullabaloo, was, if possible, even more chaotic than the previous ones. Hortense, looking like she'd aged another 20 years in the past few days, presented her case with the fervor of a religious zealot. During that meeting, a new bylaw was added, specifying the shapes that were allowed. This obscene topiary," she declared, her voice shaking with emotion, "is an affront to everything Greenhaven Glades stands for. It's a safety hazard. It's an eyesore. It's going to corrupt the youth." She'd even brought in a child psychologist, a guy who looked suspiciously like her son, wearing a fake mustache and glasses, who testified about the negative psychological effects of obscene imagery on developing minds. Apparently, my hedge was going to turn all the children of Greenhaven Glades into, Well, I'm not sure what, but it was definitely bad. Then it was my turn. Miss Hightower, I began, addressing the board with a calm, reasonable demeanor that was, of course, completely fake, seems to be under the impression that I've created this hedge sculpture solely to annoy her. While I admit that is a delightful side effect, my primary motivation was to comply with the HOA's directive to trim my hedges. I then presented my defense. I cited the previous bylaws, the ones that were in effect when I'd started my project, highlighting the fact that I had indeed trimmed my hedges. I presented photographs of the hedge from various angles, demonstrating that the overall height had been reduced, even if one particular section was taller. I argued that it was a form of artistic expression, protected by my freedom of speech. A bit of a stretch, I admit, but I was going for broke. And, just for good measure, I'd brought along my own expert. A local art critic, actually a friend of mine who wrote for a small online magazine, who testified about the bold symbolism of my hedge, its subversive commentary on suburban conformity, and its unintentional comedic brilliance. Mr. Miller's hedge, the critics declared with a perfectly straight face, is a masterpiece of modern topiary. It's a statement. It's a challenge. It's art. The other board members were, to put it mildly, divided. Some were clearly still loyal to Hortense, but their support was rapidly eroding. Others looked confused, overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of the situation. And a few, I suspected, were secretly finding the whole thing hilarious. Then, a woman from the back of the room stood up. She was a landscape architect, a resident of Greenhaven Glades I'd spoken to briefly during the hedge trimming process. "I have to disagree with Miss Hightower," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I think Mr. Miller's hedge is remarkable. It's certainly unique. And dare I say it, it's kind of brilliant. It's technically impressive, artistically expressive, and, well, it's made me laugh every time I've driven past it." That was the final blow. The board, facing a potential lawsuit, a public relations nightmare, and the growing realization that Hortense had completely lost it, voted to do nothing. They couldn't even agree on new rules. The meeting ended in chaos, with Hortense screaming about the decline of civilization and the rise of obscene topiary, and me, Sam Miller, the hedge sculpting rebel, walking out with a smug, but well-deserved, I thought, smile on my face. But Hortense, like a particularly persistent and well-fertilized weed, wasn't about to give up. What followed was a period of escalating absurdity that I can only describe as the hedge war. Hortense, obsessed with getting rid of the Greenhaven salute, or, at the very least, making my life miserable, tried every tactic she could think of. She filed complaints with the city, claiming it was a zoning violation, a safety hazard, and a public nuisance. The city inspectors came, they inspected, and they found nothing. My hedge was perfectly legal. She tried to organize a neighborhood petition to have it removed. She went door to door, armed with her clipboard and her "Think of the Children" speech, trying to convince people that my hedge was a threat to their property values and their moral well-being. The petition failed miserably. Most people either politely declined to sign or slammed the door in her face. Some even signed a counter-petition I'd created, praising the hedge as a work of art and a symbol of neighborhood spirit. She even, I suspect, attempted some minor acts of vandalism. I found a few, easily removed, "Keep Greenhaven Glades Beautiful" signs stuck in the ground near the hedge. And one morning, I woke up to find the finger mysteriously covered in toilet paper. Apparently, she was hoping to make it look less offensive. I'm not sure what her logic was there. Of course, I had security cameras everywhere, capturing her every move. and I, of course, responded in kind. Not with vandalism, oh no, I was above that. I responded with enhancements. I added landscape lighting to illuminate the Greenhaven salute at night, spotlights strategically placed to highlight its majestic form. It was like a beacon, a giant, leafy middle finger glowing in the darkness, visible for miles, or at least from Hortense's bedroom window. I installed a bird bath at the base of the finger, a small ceramic bowl filled with water with a little sign that read, "Birds welcome, HOA presidents not so much." I created a hedge viewing platform, a small raised deck, complete with comfortable chairs and a telescope, perfect for admiring my topiary masterpiece, and for keeping an eye on Hortense. And because why not, I hosted a Hedge Appreciation Day party. I invited all the neighbors, except Hortense naturally, put up decorations, balloons, streamers, and a banner that read, "Long live the hedge," and served refreshments, including finger sandwiches, get it? The local news showed up, filming a segment about the ongoing feud between a homeowner and his HOA, and the giant middle finger hedge that's dividing a neighborhood. It was a glorious, ridiculous, utterly over-the-top spectacle. I even started selling tickets for people to come view it and take pictures. And with each passing day, with each new escalation, I could feel Hortense's frustration growing, her power waning, her sanity slipping. The hedge had become more than just a sculpted bush. It was a symbol of defiance, a testament to the power of creative and slightly unhinged resistance. And I, Sam Miller, the accidental topiary artist, was winning.